Welcome to Social Work Short Bitesize number 5. What are we going to talk about today? Well, building on a couple of the previous videos, I suppose, that explored communication. We did Aristotle's modes of persuasion, and we did Rapoport rules. I thought I'd explore something that I also feel is a cornerstone of social work practice. Because communication is right up there, isn't it? Top of the tree. But also negotiation. Often in social work practice, we have to explore things with individuals and families and groups of other practitioners, even in multidisciplinary settings, where there may be differences of opinion on ways forward, desired outcomes. A range of things might be kind of up for discussion. So this inevitably leads us to having to engage in negotiation. Let's start with a few thoughts. The skillful negotiator makes every effort to make the other person feel good about themselves by showing interest and concern and a desire to understand. That's Bocassian and Lindsay in their book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. And Stephen Covey says in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And on doing this, we demonstrate that we want to listen to the person and hear what they have to offer to the debate. And people love to be heard. That's Rapoport's rules, isn't it? We need to listen first before we offer any sort of opinion. So that applies all the way through this. But also what you're doing is, when you let the other person speak, you're finding out their position. You're finding out their position so you can respond to it as effectively as you can. Let me tell you a story. 1993, ages ago. Just feels like 10 years ago, doesn't it? That's all it feels like, ages ago. South African General Constant Viljoen, who was plotting an Afrikaner guerrilla war against the political tide in South Africa that had at its forefront Nelson Mandela. General election still a year away. The country is in a state of civil unrest. Nelson Mandela invites Viljoen to his home for tea. Viljoen arrives with 3 other of his generals. He arrives at Mandela's house in Johannesburg, and they expect a maid to open the door, as would be the way in those days in that place. Instead, Mandela greets them with a warm smile, welcoming look on his face. He shakes their hands and he says, "I am delighted to see you." Invites Viljoen into his lounge for a private chat. Viljoen explains, "He asked me if I took tea, and I said yes, and he poured me a cup. He asked me if I took milk. I said yes, and he poured me milk. Then he asked me if I took sugar with my tea. I said I did, and he poured the sugar. All I had to do was stir it." Then Mandela spoke to Viljoen in his own language, Afrikaans, and he persuaded him that a guerrilla war would lead nowhere. And he suggested Viljoen stand for parliament in the first kind of multiracial elections ever to be held in South Africa. And you know the history of that. Mandela is elected into office. Viljoen, talking about this event, talks about how he left the house being persuaded that conflict wouldn't help anyone. And he said, "Mandela wins over all who meet him." Mandela knew that it was who you are and how you are, and not necessarily what you say, that influences people. He understood power and knew that negotiation, not threat, was a more potent force. And he knew that if he alienated Viljoen, he would risk undoing all the good, hard work that had gone on to reach this historic point that the country had reached in history. So the stakes were too high, he thought, for power posturing. He was firm but showed humility. Like Mandela, the skillful negotiator makes every effort to make the other person feel good. Like Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, than to be understood. People love to be heard. You can demonstrate you are attending through the communication skills that I'm sure you're already aware of. Your physical attention, your body, your facial expression. I love Erving Goffman's phrase, face work. That's out of his presentation of self in everyday life, way back in 1959. Worth a read though. Because that's what we're engaging in, face work, isn't it? We are using everything, including our face, to show the person that we're focused on them and listening. In all communication events, and equally in negotiation, we need to be congruent so that we are authentic in our listening. It's in our interests to know what the other person thinks. Don't forget that. Doing this, finding that out, shows respect and acknowledges the importance of the other person and their views. If someone feels insecure, Goffman again refers to that as being worn down. They feel threatened and they are likely to then be uncooperative. And then they become immovable. So show empathy for the person's position and be cautious if you're directly challenging someone. Rapopo's rules, one of the previous bite sizes. It's more preferable to have them explore their position and have them change their mind than if you try to change it in some kind of bullish way. And indeed, it's absolutely fine for them not to change their minds. Confrontation is usually unhelpful. People tend to reject delivered messages and accept the ideas that they believe to be their own more readily. I don't know whether you're a fan of The Sopranos. But Tony Soprano, if you remember, used to go to the counsellor to talk through his problems. And what she was really good at doing was not confronting him with any of the disconnected things he said that were full of discrepancies. But what she was good at was making him think it through and come to a solution for himself. So, we do that through many methods. But Cassian and Lindsay say when entering a negotiation event, make no assumptions except this one. The other person's intentions are generally better than you think they are. Generally, people prefer to be nice and helpful, and people don't knowingly desire bad things for themselves in any situation. So what are these key skills then we can talk about in terms of negotiation? What are they? What are the things that are essential to be ready for negotiation and to enter into it? Well, preparation is the first one. You won't be surprised to hear me say this. As ever, preparation is the key. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. What are your goals for the meeting? What can you compromise on? Where's your flexibility? I know in relation to the people we work with, service users, children, families and what have you, this seems to fly in the face of putting others at the centre and their goals at the centre. But I don't really think it does. You have to know what your role is when you meet somebody, and you have to know what you might be able to achieve for them. Maybe where your lines are. You only know this by preparing. You can still give the child, the service user, the other practitioners, if it's a MDT, you can still give them centre stage in the meeting, but you've got a sense of what your options are based on the information you have already. That might help. That preparation is good. So I'm not suggesting you enter a negotiation, a communication situation with an answer in mind that you then slavishly stick to. But you might want to have a range of things that are cognitively available to you. That's reflection before action, which is something that we often forget to do. What do I already know? What might I want to know? What things can I think about that might be problematic for me or the other people in the meeting? And then be ready to analyse. You must be able to analyse what's going on in the environment and figure out what the interests of each party are. I mean, that must sound similar to you. Case conferences, meeting families, those kind of things. You need to know what each party is after. what they're after from the negotiation around the problem, because in doing that you can find areas where they or you might be able to compromise, where there might be the ability to move in one direction or another. So analysis is about asking everybody's point of view. What does everybody think? What are the benefits? What are the negatives? How do we balance up differences? And how do we move the debate beyond maybe problematizing so we can find a solution? And that requires active listening. That's why you've got to start with rapport pause rules. That's why you've got to be like Mandela. So we go back to those core communication skills. You need to listen to everything when negotiating, with your brain, with your ears, the words, the body language, what's not being said. All of that's telling you something. You need to get behind the words and find the meaning associated with the words. Be careful not to fall into the trap of putting forward your view too strongly before others have kind of explored their own positions. Sometimes as social workers we just need to be quiet. And I think that requires you to be in the moment to the exclusion of everything else, be in that flow state, be in that deep work tunnel that I would often talk about. You need to be not distracted by whatever's coming next or what's gone before, and you need that emotional control. And I'm going to add in there being emotionally present. We often deal with very difficult circumstances, so we've got to be emotionally present, emotionally in control ourselves, and emotionally intelligent. What is triggering your own emotions? This is why we need to prepare. What might trigger the other person's emotions? It's difficult to find balance in an emotionally charged situation. I see nothing wrong in responding to distress and upset with an emotionally driven human response, but we have to be in charge of those emotions. It's okay to show your humanity, but not let our emotions override us, particularly things like if we're getting frustrated and we might even be kind of getting angry with the situation or whatever. They need to be avoided. It's okay to employ a firm tone sometimes, but we have to be sensitive and responsive, and that response comes to the last part of this little collection of ideas, our verbal communication. It seems obvious to say, but it's still worth saying. What you actually say, the words you actually use, are really important. And I think some rehearsal of the words you might want to say, saying them out loud. I used to, when I was dealing with a complaint and I was driving to somebody's house, I would think about at least the opening phrases. How am I going to say them? Where do I need to put the emphasis? Because thinking about something in your head and saying it out loud are two very different things. The words feel different in your head. They sound and feel very different when you say them out loud. And negotiation is obviously going to require some other things like collaboration and teamwork. I like to think when you go into any situation, you are formulating a very basic team. Even if you go and see parents and a child, or you go to see an older person with their son or their daughter, you're forming a kind of team, really, and that goes back to what I was saying in one of the other ones about the power of using the word we. What are we going to do about this? You're in it together. You're in it together. You might have responsibilities. You might have directions you need to get people to contemplate, but we're still all in it together. It's their lives at the end of the day, isn't it? Not yours. You'll walk away. So we've got to collaborate, and that's particularly important in a multidisciplinary field, isn't it? We've got to find collaboration. We all come from different perspectives, different professions. I remember sitting in meetings with district nurses and housing officers and the police, and they've all got their perspective. And their perspective relies on their function, I suppose, doesn't it? So we have to accept that the function of those organisations is what it is. To have a stock of housing, to uphold the law, to make sure people's health is looked after. It's different to ours. No less valid, just different maybe. But maybe we have to persuade sometimes that our view needs to be in the mix. And sometimes our view needs to be in the mix more strongly, I'd argue, that holistic view, and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the circumstances. So that fosters the need for interpersonal skills, You could only achieve that with good interpersonal skills, and I'd argue the good interpersonal skills can only be achieved through repetition of trying them out. You can't take your ball in, if you know that phrase. It's not available to you as a professional. You can't say, I'm not playing anymore, I'm taking my ball in. You need to be patient. You need to construct an argument. We're going back here, aren't we, to Aristotle's principles. What you're saying has to be logical. So you have to be able to formulate an argument, that logos part of it. And sometimes there's a decision to be made, and sometimes you might have to explain who the decision maker is. Think of Mental Capacity Act stuff here. We've already started to touch on that, and I'll do more about the Mental Capacity Act as we move through these sessions. Sometimes you're the decision maker, and you might have to explain why that is. Sometimes you're not, but you've got to be kind of ready to do that. And that, again, going back to Aristotle's ethos, pathos, and logos, which is one of the reasons I kind of started with it, because I think it underpins a lot of what we do. Your ethics. People are not going to engage in decision making with you. They're not going to engage in negotiation with you if they don't think you are trustworthy. They're going to they're going to eye you with suspicion. So it's ethics first. Who are you? What do you stand for? How does that drive what you want to achieve in the negotiation situation? What's your ethical framework? Root yourself in your professional values. It's not how do I enter this negotiation situation, it's why am I entering it in the first place? From what position? Not from what position as in where is my power, but from what position as in what are my values that are influencing why I'm involved in this. And in all of that, we start from, or some of that assists in building up rapport, considering the other person might well be nervous or apprehensive. And that can be the same with professionals. You might be the nervous and apprehensive professional. So we start by assuming people are well-intentioned, we're considerate, and we thank people. Here's one thing. The less you want to thank somebody at the end of the meeting, the more important it is to thank them, particularly in difficult meetings. Build a reputation as someone who is compassionate, even when things are difficult. So the takeaways: be prepared, listen actively, be ready to analyse and verbalise your analysis, be prepared to change your mind, be prepared to yield. Know your non-negotiables. Where can you compromise your position and where can't you? Language is important. Interpersonal skills are crucial. Show emotional control. Foster decision-making ability and being able to explain your decisions clearly. Position yourself in your ethical framework. And fundamentally, be reliable. Say what you're going to do and do what you said.